At dawn, ships move again through Panama. But climate science quietly warns this recovery may be temporary. After historic droughts crippled traffic, the Panama Canal is rebounding. Yet climate models warn that worsening water crises threaten global trade. At the narrow waist of the Americas, a man-made waterway continues to quietly shape the global economy. The Panama Canal is not simply a shortcut between oceans. It is a pressure valve for global trade, absorbing demand, smoothing supply chains, and compressing distance in a world built on speed. Every year, roughly 14,000 vessels pass through this 50-mile corridor, carrying nearly 5% of all international trade. When the canal flows freely, global commerce feels seamless. When it slows, the consequences are immediate and far-reaching. For the United States, the canal is indispensable. Around 40% of all U.S. container traffic depends on this route, making it a central artery for imports, exports, and energy flows. In total, approximately $270 billion worth of cargo moves through the canal annually. These numbers are not abstract. They translate directly into fuel prices, grocery shelves, industrial supply chains, and inflation rates. What makes the canal uniquely powerful is not just what it carries, but what it prevents. Without it, ships must detour thousands of miles around South America, burning more fuel, consuming more time, and injecting higher costs into every product they carry. This is why even temporary restrictions, measured in a few ships per day, can ripple outward, disrupting markets far beyond Panama's borders. The canal's importance lies not in spectacle, but in its quiet, constant reliability. The Panama Canal does not function like most waterways. It is not a trench carved at sea level. It is a machine, one powered almost entirely by fresh water. Ships entering the canal do not simply sail through. They are lifted, step by step, across the continental divide, using a system of locks that act like water elevators. Each vessel is raised to Gatun Lake, carried across the interior of Panama, then lowered back to sea level on the opposite coast. This entire process depends on gravity and stored rainfall. Gatun Lake, created by damming the Chagres River, serves as the canal's beating heart. Every time a ship transits the locks, approximately 50 million gallons of fresh water are released downstream and ultimately lost to the ocean. There is no pump pushing it back. The system resets only when rain falls. This design made sense in the early 20th century, when rainfall patterns were stable and water was abundant. For decades, the canal's greatest constraint was engineering precision and traffic management. Today, the limiting factor is no longer steel or concrete. It is water itself. The ships can be built larger, the locks can be reinforced, schedules can be optimized. But without sufficient rainfall to replenish Gatun Lake, the canal cannot operate at full capacity. In this system, water is not a supporting resource. It is the currency of movement. The warning signs appeared quietly. Rainfall patterns shifted. Wet seasons shortened. Dry spells lingered longer than expected. By late 2022, the Panama Canal entered what would become the most severe drought in its operational history. El Niño conditions intensified the problem, suppressing rainfall across the watershed that feeds Gatun Lake. Month by month, water levels fell. By 2023, the crisis was undeniable. Gatun Lake dropped well below historical averages, forcing canal authorities into emergency mode. Daily transits were slashed from a normal 36 to 38 vessels, down to as few as 22. Ships began to stack up at both entrances to the canal, forming queues that stretched for miles. Some vessels waited weeks for a slot. To conserve water, strict draft restrictions were imposed. Ships could no longer carry full loads. Containers were left behind. Energy cargoes were deferred. The canal was still open, but its efficiency, the very thing that defined its value, was collapsing. By early 2024, the drought was officially described as the worst the canal had ever faced. The system had reached its hydrological limits. What had once been a predictable, clockwork operation was now governed by rainfall forecasts and emergency rationing. The canal was no longer just managing traffic. It was fighting for water. The impact was swift and uneven. Liquefied natural gas transits through the canal collapsed by 66%. Dry bulk shipping, Grains, minerals, industrial raw materials suffered even deeper declines. Energy producers scrambled. Shipping companies recalculated routes. Insurance costs rose. As capacity tightened, costs surged. Ships unable to secure canal slots were forced into longer voyages around Cape Horn, adding thousands of nautical miles to their journeys. These detours burned more fuel, consumed more time, and injected volatility into already fragile supply chains. The price of delay became measurable in freight rates, in energy markets, and ultimately at the checkout counter. For consumers, the effects were indirect but persistent. Higher shipping costs translated into higher prices for food, manufactured goods, and fuel. Inflationary pressure crept upward, not because of shortages, but because efficiency had been lost. The canal's water shortage revealed an uncomfortable truth. Modern trade is optimized for speed, not resilience. When a single choke point falters, the system has few painless alternatives. The drought in Panama was not just a regional weather event. It was a stress test for globalization itself. Survival required improvisation. Canal authorities introduced strict draft limits, forcing ships to sail lighter so they would consume less water passing through the locks. Each reduced inch of draft saved thousands of gallons. The system became one of trade-offs. Cargo sacrificed to preserve movement. Slot rationing followed. Transit capacity was carefully allocated, and when demand exceeded supply, auctions were introduced. In extreme cases, shipping companies paid more than $2 million for a single guaranteed passage. It was a blunt instrument, but it restored a degree of predictability to an increasingly uncertain system. Water conservation protocols were tightened across operations. Non-essential transits were limited. Every lock cycle was scrutinized. Efficiency became survival. Shipping companies, unwilling to wait, sought alternatives. Maersk introduced a land bridge solution, unloading containers on one coast, moving them across Panama by rail, and reloading them onto vessels on the other side. It was costly and complex, but faster than waiting weeks at anchor. None of these measures solved the underlying problem. They bought time. They stabilized the system under extreme stress, and they revealed how fragile even the most iconic infrastructure can become when natural limits are reached. Then the rains returned. In early 2025, precipitation across the canal watershed improved significantly. Gatun Lake began to rise, climbing back toward operational norms. Restrictions were gradually eased. Transits increased first to the low 30s, then steadily toward 36 vessels per day. Traffic returned. So did revenue. In the final quarter of the year, the canal generated a windfall of between $400 and $450 million. On the surface, the crisis appeared to be ending. The queues shortened. Confidence crept back into schedules. But the recovery carried a quiet caveat. The canal had not changed the climate. It had adapted to it. The rebound was the result of favorable weather layered atop emergency reforms. Water levels were healthier, but still vulnerable. Forecasts improved, but uncertainty remained. The canal was functioning again, but under new assumptions. Operators now understood that normal operations could no longer be taken for granted. Every forecast mattered. Every dry season carried risk. The system had recovered, but it had not been cured. Out of the crisis came structural change. The Panama Canal Authority abandoned its reliance on short-term scheduling and introduced a long-term booking system. Slots were reserved months in advance, allowing operators to plan with certainty and enabling the canal to forecast water demand more accurately. At the same time, the canal began to favor fewer, larger vessels. Bigger ships moved more cargo per transit, reducing total lock cycles and saving water. It was a strategic shift, optimize volume without maximizing passages. This change reshaped traffic patterns. Container ships captured a larger share of available slots. Congestion eased, predictability returned. For shippers, reliability mattered more than speed. The canal was no longer just an engineering system. It had become a water-managed marketplace, balancing hydrology and economics with every booking decision. The model worked, but only within limits defined by rainfall and reservoirs. Not all ships use water equally. The older Panamax locks, built in the early 20th century, released nearly all their water with every transit. The newer Neo-Panamax locks, opened in 2016, tell a different story. Equipped with water recovery basins, these modern locks can reclaim up to 60% of the water used during each passage. The difference is profound. In times of drought, Neo-Panamax transits become vastly more efficient, stretching limited water supplies further. This technical advantage is reshaping the canal's future. Traffic is gradually shifting toward larger vessels designed for the newer locks. Smaller, less efficient transits are becoming harder to justify when water is scarce. In a warming world, infrastructure design becomes destiny. The canal's survival increasingly depends not just on how much rain falls, but on which ships pass through and how much water they leave behind. By 2024, the conversation surrounding the Panama Canal shifted from operational fixes to scientific projections. The question was no longer how to survive the last drought, but how many more were coming. To answer it, researchers turned to climate models, not speculation. Among them was a comprehensive study led by Northeastern University, examining the canal's future through the lens of long-term climate science. Using 27 high-resolution climate models, researchers simulated monthly water levels in Gotten Lake through the end of the century. The models did not focus on single disasters. They traced patterns, slow, compounding shifts in rainfall and evaporation that quietly undermine reliability over decades. The findings were consistent across most scenarios. Wet season rainfall declines. Dry seasons lengthen. Evaporation increases as temperatures rise. For a system dependent almost entirely on rainfall, this imbalance is critical. Less rain means lower replenishment. More heat means faster loss. Together, they compress the margin of safety that the canal once relied upon. The models show that disruptive low water conditions, once rare, become increasingly common under moderate to high emissions pathways. This was not a forecast of collapse. It was a warning of frequency. The canal would still function, but interruptions would arrive more often, last longer, and demand harsher trade-offs. Climate change, in this context, does not break the canal. It slowly erodes the certainty that global trade depends on. What emerges from the data is not a future defined by a single catastrophe, but by repetition. Droughts no longer appear as once-in-a-generation anomalies. They recur, they overlap, they leave less time for recovery. Low water conditions that once forced temporary restrictions begin to define operational planning. The models point toward amplified extremes. Dry periods become drier. Wet periods grow less reliable. The system oscillates more violently, offering fewer predictable seasons to rebuild water reserves. For canal managers, this means living closer to the edge, making decisions with smaller buffers and higher stakes. Crucially, researchers compared multiple emissions pathways. In low emissions scenarios, water levels stabilize. Variability remains, but it stays manageable. In high emissions scenarios, drought frequency and severity escalate sharply. The most likely future, however, lies between these extremes. Current global trends place the world on a middle pathway: partial mitigation, incomplete restraint. Under this scenario, the canal avoids constant crises, but faces recurring disruption. Planning becomes perpetual. Stability becomes conditional. Drought in this future is no longer an emergency. It is a background condition, one that reshapes how infrastructure must be designed, financed, and governed. What happens in Panama does not stay in Panama. The canal is a node, small in geography, massive in consequence. Its vulnerability exposes the fragility of a global economy built on efficiency rather than redundancy. The Panama Canal was built for a stable climate. It functioned flawlessly within it, but the future will not resemble the past that shaped its design. Water, not steel, is now the choke point. Engineering can extend capacity, but it cannot manufacture rainfall. The balance between environment and infrastructure has shifted. The canal teaches a broader lesson. The world's most critical systems, ports, power grids, waterways, were optimized for yesterday's conditions. Tomorrow demands resilience measured in decades, not quarters. Planning must start earlier, investments must last longer, and assumptions must change. The canal's story is not about failure. It is about adaptation under pressure and the cost of delay. The Panama Canal's recovery proves human ingenuity can adapt. But climate models are clear. Without emissions cuts and bold water investment, today's rebound may only delay tomorrow's crisis. The canal's future is no longer just an engineering challenge. It's a climate test for global trade itself.